Imagine it's a Thursday evening in March 2026. You're sitting at a kitchen table in a rental apartment in Austin, Texas. The rent is $2,400 a month. The apartment is nothing special. 2 bedrooms, laminate floors, a view of a parking lot. You're a software developer. You make $127,000 a year. By every measure your parents would have recognized, you've made it. You're educated. You're employed in a growing industry. You have health insurance. You contribute to your 401k. And yet, you're staring at your bank account after payday, after rent, after the car payment on a vehicle. You need to commute to the hybrid office, after student loans, after health insurance premiums, after childcare for one child at $800 a month, after groceries that somehow cost $900 this month, after utilities, after the subscription software you need to stay employable. After everything, you have $214 left. That's not discretionary income, that's survival margin. That's one unexpected car repair away from a credit card spiral. You're not bad with money. You've never bought a boat. You don't gamble. You haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. You cook at home. You buy generic brands. You haven't updated your wardrobe since 2021, and you're still broke. Not broke like you can't eat. Broke like you can't build anything. Broke like you're running on a treadmill bolted to the floor. Broke like the math simply doesn't work anymore. This isn't a personal failure. This isn't a lack of discipline or financial literacy. This is the documented outcome of 40 years of structural economic engineering, and most people living it never understand why. This video is not about budgeting tips. It's not about side hustles or passive income or mindset optimization. This is a forensic examination of a system that was designed piece by piece to extract wealth from working professionals and redirect it upward. A system that creates the appearance of prosperity while hollowing out the actual capacity to build wealth. Once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. This isn't theory, it's documented history, it's math, it's policy. And it explains why someone earning 6 figures in 2026 can feel exactly as financially precarious as their grandparents did earning $18,000 in 1975. The only difference is the grandparents could buy a house. The dominant narrative goes like this. People are broke because they make bad decisions. They spend too much on lattes and avocado toast. They don't save enough. They lack discipline. They lack hustle. They lack the mindset. This narrative is everywhere. It's in best-selling books. It's on financial podcasts. It's in the assumptions of policymakers who design tax incentives around the idea that people simply need to choose to save more. And it contains a grain of truth, which is what makes it so effective as camouflage. Yes, individual decisions matter. Yes, some people are irresponsible with money. But here's what this narrative ignores. If the fundamental math doesn't work, no amount of discipline can overcome it. If your rent consumes 38% of your gross income, if your healthcare premiums consume 9%, if your childcare consumes 17%, if your student loans consume 8%, if your transportation consumes 11%, if your food and utilities consume 12%, that's 95%. Before you've bought a single thing you didn't absolutely need. No budgeting app fixes that. No financial literacy course addresses it. The math is the math. And here's the uncomfortable pattern. This math has gotten steadily worse for 40 consecutive years. Not because people got stupider, not because they got lazier, because the cost structure of basic existence was redesigned. What most people experience as personal financial failure is actually the downstream effect of 3 interlocking structural changes that occurred between 1971 and 2008. First, the decoupling of wages from productivity. Between 1948 and 1973, productivity rose 96.7% in America. Hourly compensation rose 91.3%. They moved together. When workers produced more value, they captured more value. After 1973, productivity continued rising. Between 1973 and 2023, productivity rose another 77%. Hourly compensation rose 17%. That gap, the 60-point divergence, represents trillions of dollars in value that workers created but did not receive. That wealth didn't disappear. It was captured by owners of capital assets, by shareholders, by real estate portfolios, by financial instruments. This is not interpretation. This is Bureau of Labor Statistics for entertainment, graph clarity. Published. Second, the financialization of basic needs. In 1970, the average American house cost 2.2 times the median annual household income. In 2024, that ratio exceeded 7.7 times in major metropolitan areas. In some coastal cities, it surpassed 12 times. Housing didn't get 3.5 times better. It got financialized, treated as an asset class, inflated by institutional investors, by REITs, by foreign capital seeking safe harbor, by monetary policy that lowered interest rates for decades while encouraging debt finance purchases. The same process occurred with healthcare. In 1960, healthcare spending represented 5% of GDP. By 2023, it represented 17.3%. That's not because people got sicker. It's because healthcare became an extraction system, a complex web of insurance intermediaries, pharmaceutical patent abuse, and administrative bloat that captures an ever-growing share of every paycheck. Education followed the same arc. In 1980, the average annual cost of a four-year public university, adjusted for inflation, was approximately $3,500. By 2023, it exceeded $11,000 per year at public institutions and $42,000 at private ones. Total student debt in America surpassed $1.77 trillion. An entire generation entered the workforce owing more than their parents' first mortgages. In the 1970s, a family could achieve middle-class stability on a single income. When women entered the workforce en masse, which was a positive social development, families briefly had more purchasing power, 2 incomes. But here's what happened next. The cost of housing, education, and childcare adjusted upward to capture the new second income. Bidding wars for houses in good school districts intensified. Tuition rose. Childcare costs exploded because now both parents worked, creating demand for a service that barely existed before. Within a generation, 2 incomes became necessary to afford what one income previously provided. The family now had higher gross income, but no more security. In fact, less security, because if one earner lost their job, the entire structure collapsed. This is the trap. Not a trap of personal choices, a trap of system design. Now we get to the part that rarely gets explained clearly. There's a mechanism at the center of this, and it's elegantly brutal. It's called asset price inflation coupled with wage stagnation. Here's how it works. When central banks engage in monetary easing, lowering interest rates, buying bonds, expanding the money supply, they claim to be stimulating the economy. And in some technical sense, they are. Credit becomes cheaper. Businesses can borrow more easily. But where does that new money actually go? It flows into asset markets, into stocks, into real estate, into private equity, into anything that can be bought, held, and levered. It does not flow into wages. Wages are set by labor markets, which are disciplined by globalization, automation, and the ever-present threat of unemployment. So the person who already owns assets sees their net worth rise. The person who works for wages sees their paycheck stay flat, while the cost of everything they need to buy, housing, education, healthcare, rises with asset prices. This is the mechanism. The money supply expands, assets inflate, wages stagnate, the gap widens, every month, every year. And the worker runs faster on the treadmill while the finish line recedes. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just the mathematical consequence of policy choices that favor asset owners over wage earners. The people who designed these policies didn't sit in a room and decide to impoverish the middle class. They simply optimized for metrics that mattered to them: GDP growth, stock market performance. Low inflation is measured by CPI, while ignoring the metrics that mattered to workers. CPI, by the way, is notoriously manipulated. Housing costs in CPI are measured by owner's equivalent rent, a theoretical construct that massively underweights actual housing inflation. Healthcare costs are adjusted for quality improvements that exist mainly on paper. Education costs are treated as discretionary. So the official inflation number stays low. Wages keep pace with official inflation. And workers wonder why they're falling behind when the statistics say they shouldn't be. This is the hidden mechanism. None of this is new. Rome experienced it in the 3rd and 4th centuries. As the empire's territorial expansion stalled and plunder dried up, the Roman elite began extracting wealth from their own population. Taxes increased. Small farmers were driven into debt. Land concentrated in the hands of large estates. A class called the colony emerged. Technically, free peasants who were economically bound to land they didn't own, obligated to work for landlords who controlled everything. The colony weren't slaves. They had legal rights. They had wages. But they had no path to ownership, no way to accumulate capital, no exit. They were broke despite working. Sound familiar? The late Roman economy perfected something we'd now call debt peonage, the appearance of freedom combined with the reality of structural extraction. The British Empire did it differently. During the enclosure movements of the 18th and 19th centuries, common lands that peasants had used for centuries were privatized, converted to sheep pastures for the wool trade. Peasants who had been subsistence farmers became landless workers, forced to migrate to industrial cities and sell their labor for wages. Their nominal income might have been higher than subsistence farming, but they had lost something money couldn't measure: the means of production, self-sufficiency, resilience. They became dependent on wages in an economy where those wages would never accumulate into ownership. The American post-war period represents an anomaly. Between 1945 and 1973, something unusual happened. A combination of factors: strong unions, high marginal tax rates, limited global competition, New Deal financial regulations, and a massive expansion of public investment created conditions where wage earners could actually build wealth. Home ownership expanded. A single income could support a family. Pensions provided retirement security. Education was affordable, often free at public universities. This period is what most Americans think of as normal, the era their parents and grandparents inhabited. But it wasn't normal. It was a historical anomaly produced by specific policy choices that were deliberately reversed starting in the 1970s. The Powell Memo of 1971 explicitly called for corporate America to reassert control over economic policy. The political movements that followed, deregulation, union busting, tax cuts for capital gains, financialization, were not accidents. They were projects. By 2026, the policy environment has returned to something much closer to the 19th century norm than the mid-20th century exception. The question is not why people are broke. The question is why anyone expected them not to be. Let's be precise about this. The S&P 500 returned approximately 10.5% annually on average between 1980 and 2023. Wages grew approximately 0.2% annually in real terms. If you owned capital in that period, you became geometrically wealthier. If you worked for wages, you ran in place. The top 1% of American households now hold more wealth than the entire middle class combined. That sentence deserves to be read twice. The top 1% now holds 31% of all household wealth. The bottom 50% holds 2.6%. This is not accidental. This is the cumulative outcome of 40 years of compound returns in asset markets coupled with 40 years of wage stagnation. Real estate investors benefited. Homeowners who bought before 2010 benefited. Private equity benefited. Anyone positioned to buy assets with cheap debt benefited. The software developer in Austin, paying 38% of gross income in rent, is directly funding those returns. The healthcare administrator, watching insurance premiums rise, is directly funding hospital system profits and pharmaceutical company share buybacks. The parent paying $22,000 per year for childcare is directly funding the private equity firms that rolled up the daycare industry. Every dollar extracted from wage earners in excess of historical norms becomes a dollar of return for asset owners. This is the mechanism. The people who paid the price are the people who did everything right. They went to college because they were told to. They accumulated debt that their parents never had to carry. They got professional jobs because that was the path. They discovered those jobs were subject to the same cost pressures as any other labor: outsourcing, automation, algorithmic management. They tried to buy homes because ownership is how you build wealth. They discovered that home prices had been bid up by institutional capital to multiples that their salaries could never sustain. They tried to save for retirement because they were told there would be no pensions. They discovered that saving 10% of a stagnant income while expenses consumed 95% was a mathematical impossibility. They are broke, not because they failed, because the system couldn't end any other way. This is important to understand. When the ratio of home prices to income rises from 2.2 to 7.7, someone is being mathematically excluded from ownership. That's not a market fluctuation. That's a structural transfer. When healthcare costs rise from 5% of GDP to 17%, someone is paying that additional 12 percentage points. That someone is wage earners, directly through premiums and indirectly through suppressed wage growth. When productivity and wages diverge by 60 points, someone is keeping the difference. That someone is capital owners, through mechanisms like stock buybacks, dividend payments, and executive compensation. The people who paid the price are the people who work for a living instead of owning for a living. That's most people. That's probably you. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. This situation has an irreversible constraint at its center. The constraint is debt math. When asset prices rise faster than wages for 4 decades, those who don't already own assets can only access them through debt. Mortgages, student loans, auto loans, credit cards. Debt requires interest payments. Interest payments consume income that could otherwise accumulate. So the person trying to catch up falls further behind with every payment. Meanwhile, the person who already owns assets uses those assets as collateral to borrow at low rates and acquire more assets. This is called leverage, and it's how wealth compounds in an era of cheap money. The wage earner pays 7.5% interest on their mortgage. The asset owner borrows at 4% against their portfolio. The wage earner pays 22% interest on credit card debt accumulated during emergencies. The asset owner never experiences emergencies because they have capital reserves. The math works in one direction. And here's the political impossibility that seals the trap. Any policy that would actually reverse this, significantly higher wages, significantly lower asset prices, significantly higher taxes on capital, would be experienced as an economic crisis by the people who benefit from the current system. Asset owners, homeowners, retirees with 401ks, the entire financial industry. Those people vote, they donate to campaigns, they own media outlets. So the policies that would help wage earners are politically impossible to implement, while the policies that help asset owners are politically frictionless. That's the trap, not a conspiracy, just a system where the beneficiaries have structural power and the losers don't. Now, there's another mechanism that rarely gets discussed. It's called the velocity of money. When a wage earner receives income, that money moves. It gets spent on rent, groceries, childcare, gas. It enters circulation. It becomes someone else's income. The velocity is high. When an asset owner receives investment returns, that money often stays parked. It goes into another asset, a stock, a bond, a fund. It doesn't circulate through the real economy. The velocity is low. As wealth has concentrated upward, the velocity of money has collapsed. In 1997, the velocity of M2 money supply was 2.2. By 2023, it had fallen below 1.3. This means the same dollar moves through the economy fewer times per year. This is partly why printing trillions of dollars didn't produce the consumer price hyperinflation that many predicted. The money didn't go to consumers. It went to asset markets. It parked. But this creates a secondary trap. When velocity is low, economic growth depends even more on credit expansion, on people borrowing money to spend, and who borrows? Wage earners. So the system requires wage earners to take on more debt to sustain growth, even though that debt is precisely what prevents them from building wealth. Think about what that means. The economic growth that benefits asset owners depends on the indebtedness of wage earners. This isn't sustainable. But sustainability isn't the point. Extraction is the point. There's a psychological dimension to this that deserves examination. Professional class jobs come with professional class costs. To maintain a job that pays $127,000, you need certain things. You need to live in a metropolitan area where those jobs exist. Metropolitan areas have high rents. You need a car that doesn't break down, or you risk losing the job. That means a car payment. You need a wardrobe that signals competence. That means periodic purchases that aren't optional. You need childcare that operates during professional hours. That means expensive childcare. You need the software subscriptions, the professional development courses, the certifications that keep you employable. None of these are reimbursed. You need health insurance that covers actual medical needs, not just catastrophic events. That means premium plans. You need to live in a school district that doesn't actively damage your children's future. Those districts are priced accordingly. These aren't luxuries. They're the operating costs of maintaining your position in the professional class. But here's the trap. They consume exactly the premium that your professional income provides. You earn more than a service worker, but your costs are proportionally higher. The delta, the surplus you should be accumulating, is captured by the systems that extract from professionals. Landlords in expensive metros, insurance companies with tiered plans, universities with alumni donation expectations, childcare companies owned by private equity, software companies with subscription models. You're not broke despite your good job. You're broke because of the costs that come with your good job. This is success theater, the appearance of prosperity without the underlying accumulation. Now let's talk about what this means over generations. Your parents, if they're boomers, probably bought a house in the 1980s or early 1990s. They paid 2.5 to 3 times their annual income. That house appreciated 400% or more. That appreciation is their net worth. They didn't do anything particularly wise. They just bought an asset before the financialization epoch reached its mature form. You, trying to buy in 2026, face houses priced at 7 to 12 times your income. Even if you manage to buy, you're paying so much of your income to the mortgage that you can't save. You can't invest. You can't compound. And here's the generational lock. Your parents' home equity is connected to your inability to buy. The high prices that made them wealthy are the high prices that impoverish you. If prices fell to the levels that would make home ownership accessible, say 2.5 times income, your parents would lose 60% of their net worth. Their retirement security would evaporate. The political system would intervene to prevent this, so prices don't fall. The Federal Reserve lowers rates to support asset prices. The government creates programs that subsidize demand without increasing supply. Zoning laws restrict construction in desirable areas. Every intervention protects existing owners at the expense of aspiring owners. Your generation pays the price for your parents' generation's wealth. This isn't personal, it's structural, and it explains why family relationships around money have become so strained. The generations are on opposite sides of an economic divide that neither fully understands. Let's step back and see the system whole. You have an economy where wages are disciplined by global labor competition and automation. Asset prices are inflated by decades of loose monetary policy. Basic needs have been financialized and priced as assets. The political system is dominated by asset owners. The metrics used to evaluate the economy systematically underweight wage earner welfare. In this system, the outcome is determined. Workers will fall behind. They will work harder and accumulate less. They will experience this as personal failure because the cultural narrative tells them to. They will seek explanations in self-improvement and budgeting tips because those are the explanations available. And the system will continue extracting. This is not pessimism. This is pattern recognition. Every empire at a certain stage of its development begins extracting from its own middle class because external extraction has reached its limits. Rome did it, Spain did it, Britain did it. America is doing it now. The good job that doesn't build wealth is the modern version of the Roman colony, technically free, practically bound, working land you'll never own. There's a reason this analysis matters in 2026 specifically. Several trends are converging. Interest rates rose from near zero to over 5% between 2022 and 2024. This made debt more expensive, but it didn't make assets cheaper because supply remained constrained and institutional buyers remained active. Artificial intelligence is accelerating the automation of cognitive work. The professional class, lawyers, programmers, analysts, writers, is now facing the same displacement pressures that factory workers faced in the 1980s. The wage discipline is intensifying. Corporate consolidation has reached extreme levels. In sector after sector, 3 or 4 companies control majority market share. This allows coordinated pricing power that extracts from consumers without visible collusion. Climate adaptation costs are beginning to materialize. Insurance premiums in affected regions have doubled or tripled. This is a new extraction mechanism that will grow. Healthcare costs continue their exponential rise, now interacting with an aging boomer population that will require unprecedented levels of care. All of these trends point in the same direction. Intensified extraction from wage earners. The person in Austin with $214 left after payday is not experiencing a temporary difficulty. They are experiencing the permanent condition of their economic class. At this point, there are only 3 options. 1, collective political action to restructure the system. Higher minimum wages, universal health care, public housing, free education, progressive taxation of wealth, antitrust enforcement, union power. This would require overcoming the structural political advantages of asset owners, which means either a mass movement or a crisis severe enough to discredit the existing order. 2, individual exit strategies. Geographic arbitrage, moving to lower cost areas, radical expense reduction, alternative income streams, refusal to participate in the professional class cost structure. This works for some individuals, but cannot solve the systemic problem. If everyone moved to low-cost areas, those areas would become high-cost areas. This is a lifeboat strategy, not a solution. 3, acceptance. Understanding that the system is designed to extract and adjusting expectations accordingly, not expecting to build wealth through wages, finding meaning outside economic accumulation. This is psychologically difficult because the cultural programming runs deep. But it may be the most honest response for individuals who lack the resources to exit or the power to change the system. None of these are painless. That's the trap. A brief word. This analysis is historical and educational. It is not financial advice. It is not an investment recommendation. It is not a prediction of specific future events. It is an attempt to understand the structural forces that produce the outcomes we observe. Your individual circumstances may vary. Professional guidance should be sought for personal financial decisions. Let's return to the apartment in Austin, the software developer with $214 left after payday. They're not doing anything wrong. They're not making mistakes. They're experiencing the documented outcome of a system that was designed step by step over 4 decades. The system tells them to budget better, to hustle more, to optimize, but the system is lying. The math doesn't work. No amount of individual optimization makes the math work. The only question is whether they'll spend their remaining years blaming themselves or understanding the actual mechanism. History suggests most will blame themselves. That's how these systems persist. The ideology of personal responsibility obscures the reality of structural extraction, but some will see it. Some will understand that the paycheck is not a path to wealth. It's a maintenance payment for continued labor, just enough to ensure they show up tomorrow, never enough to escape. This has happened before. Rome, Britain, Spain. It's happening now. The question isn't whether the American middle class is being hollowed out. That question was answered 20 years ago. The question is what emerges on the other side. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes. Understanding these patterns doesn't change them, but it does clarify the nature of the situation. Most people never trace these threads to their source. They experience the symptoms, the anxiety, the scarcity, the inexplicable feeling that something is wrong, without diagnosing the cause. This channel exists to perform these autopsies while the patient is still walking around, to document the mechanisms before they're rewritten as hindsight. If that kind of analysis is useful to you, consider subscribing.